I'm Daniel Silva, Director of Analytics at Prudential. I'm also a board member for the Institute for Data Science at New Jersey Institute of Technology. I'm going to go through the process of going through entity resolution, how, the why, and all the things we found in there. So issues facing financial services and insurance companies. This seems to be the general consensus I see in the industry. Silo data. I mean, I like to make my presentations interactive. Anybody who feels like raising their hands, and you've seen this too in your organization, there's silo data. You got data sitting in different entities, whether it's, let's say, the PNC side, life side, annuity side, group side, whatever it is. They all have their own data, their own databases. Nothing talks to each other. With that, it's hard to get the clients to understand who is a client where, right? They're sitting in all these different databases. Some organizations, what they end up doing is, let's just merge all the client information into one big database, right? So now you have all your client data sitting in individual databases, then another database with all the enterprise clients sitting in there, and they update at different times, things get out of alignment, and then you have issues with that. There's also privacy concerns, regulations we go through, and there's a reason why some of that data is separated. So we have to be conscious of that. Legacy data. Prudential's a 150-year-old company. We've got paper. We've got tons and tons of paper and filing cabinets. They're sitting in storage. I've recently been working with that area to try to optimize the spend and figure out some of what can we do in terms of analytics. And I was really surprised how much paper we have. Well, that all has to be digitized, and we have to get that aligned and sorted and go through and see what can be thrown out, what's still relevant and whatnot. And that puts, it's another database when you think about it, right? And a lot of that data is incomplete. If you can imagine somebody opened a policy 50 years ago, they put just the first name, last name. There's no address. If you're lucky, there's a date of birth. There's some piece of information. So that's a huge issue that we face in there. So why entity resolution? Why did we go through this? And we knew we needed to go through this. I knew we needed to go through this. But then the next question is, do you build your own, or do you just buy a solution that's out there? So I began by building my own. And as I was going through it, I realized it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to keep it updated, maintained, and it also takes a lot of time. So every organization is going to face this. We face it all the time. Can we build something in-house, or do we just look external? So we decided, let's do a proof of concept here with sensing and see what we can get out of it. And really what we're looking to do is try to get that master data management, that customer onboarding process, right? We want to know who our clients are. We want to understand the households that are being formed, existing households. We want to understand the relationships that we have with them. We also wanted to use it from a fraud perspective. We wanted to see the attacks before they happen. We want to be able to gather a lot of this information. Now, when fraud happens, I work with our fraud teams for fraud analytics. It's pretty interesting the amount of data that they're looking at. They're going through dozens and dozens of different databases, source systems, to really understand how that fraud took place. And you need to be able to piece all that together, and which in some cases it's all done manually. So we were looking at this as a potential solution. Regulatory compliance. Every financial institution has regulatory compliance needs. They're going to have to make sure they have processes in place to deter fraud, to ensure they're compliant in terms of beneficiaries or abandoned property. There's all these things, and that leads it to abandoned property. Because this is a huge issue in the industry, right? You opened that policy 50 years ago, and you put a beneficiary. Comes time, we find out. We usually get notified maybe from Social Security or something. The person passed away. It's our job to find that beneficiary, but how do we find that? Well, for all we have is a name, and it's a hard process. But if we have little bits and pieces of information, like we do in our siloed systems, where data sits in all these different databases, you could stitch that all together to find the customer or the beneficiary. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trying to achieve that customer view. How do we do that? And a lot of it comes from the data integration. So going back to what we were saying before, we have data all over the place. You have your policy data. Customer comes in, they open a policy, and it could be a life insurance, could be an annuity, it could be a property casualty type relationship. There's information sitting out there. You have claim information. And a lot of people think, well, it's just a claim, but we need to understand is who's the benefactor of that claim. A lot of times when we're seeing that's that 50-year-old policy, we used to see the beneficiary as the children of the insured. Well, who's the children? As we're going through the claim process, we start to find out, oh, here's the children, who are they? But do we really know who they are? Because this is during the claim process. They may already be existing clients. So we want to understand that. We want to be able to then reach out to a financial advisor that's already working with that beneficiary to say, hey, let's streamline that process, right? And we also have a lot of data that's third party. We append data from third party providers to get a holistic view of our clients. So as you can imagine, there's data all over the place. The big thing is leaving the data where it is. And this is where entity resolution comes in handy, especially something like Sensing that we used, was we didn't have to move our data into a whole new database. It could sit where it is today. There's no need to incur all those costs. So now we can piece together the customer. We can understand our client relationship across the entire enterprise. And once we have that, we can essentially do a better job at cross-selling. We understand the full picture that we have, plus with the external data that we put in together, we're able to get the holistic view in there. So ideally, this is what's crucial about creating that custom tailored service, right? Everybody wants to seek that individual level of service. We don't want the cookie cut experience. We want financial needs to be serviced the way we want. We're looking to be individuals in that space. So a one-size-fits-all doesn't necessarily work. And that's when you have all this information put together properly, you can achieve that. And that's part of the whole benefit process here I went through. Skipped ahead a little bit. But the operational side was crucial because we don't have to go and manually pull all those databases together into one single database, which then has to be maintained by a team and go through this whole process. We can leave the data where it sits today. We're just pulling it into this entity resolution process. It's creating the metadata on top, and then there's a UI that sits on top of that we can custom build in order to get the results that we need out of that. And that's going to lead to a better strategic decision making ultimately at the end of the day. And one of my favorite parts here is fraud. So one of the things I do is handle fraud analytics. We're trying to understand where fraud is coming from. And I try to bucket this into things that kind of make sense, right? You have your internal fraud, things where you potentially have employees taking over accounts. I saw a case out of, I think it was actually out of New Jersey. It was in the news months ago, where a new hire came in. The first thing this new hire did was search for all the high net worth clients. The second thing this person did was change the email address to their personal email address. Well, they created a fake one, obviously, and then started interacting with the client, quote unquote, in order then to move money around, right? So how do you tackle these type of scenarios? And this is how I have to think. I have to see what's out there, what type of fraud is occurring in order to understand it, and then figure out how we're going to tackle it. There's also potential fraud with financial professionals. If they find out a client's passing away, they can go through the records, they could try to change the beneficiary. These things happen all over the industry and whatnot. What's crazy is all this fraud costs the industry billions of dollars each year. So having something in place that could try to mitigate it is crucial. And when we look at, I had external fraud as the account takeovers and, social engineering techniques, things going on. There's also client fraud you have to be wary of, right? You're going to onboard a new client. And I was talking to somebody earlier, and they said, yeah, when we designed our underwriting process to be automatic and, you can apply for a policy and you get a decision instantly and all that, they were telling me we designed it with the perfect customer in mind. We didn't design it with someone trying to take advantage of the system, right? So that's where some of this fraud analytics comes into play, where you have to kind of think, how can the system be abused? What can potentially happen? And how do you mitigate that, right? And I've seen, these are just a small sample of things that we've seen. So these all present all different challenges, right? What we found with using an entity resolution software is we can understand when someone's opening up that account. We could see if that phone number is already on or email address or any piece of the information, address, whatever it is, we can see if that's already in a known fraud database as soon as they're trying to open a policy with us. We can also be on the lookout for account changes. So a lot of the account takeover that occur, that at least I've seen from different fraud cases, occur when everything's fine with the client. They opened up that policy, 10, 15 years ago. They don't bother looking at the statements. They know it's there. Someone gets a hold of the someone's identity. They call in and they start doing little things, right? Let me change that phone number. Let me change that email address. Let me change the mailing address. Small things, right? And they do it little by little until then they can get full control. So you might start seeing a pattern of this, right? They're not going to just attack one client. They're going to probably try to attack multiple people at the same time. So now you can start getting those red flags that as information is being changed in real time, you'll know. And you'll say, hey, this is on this known list, right? So being able to identify this, create those red flags for those different scenarios, it's huge. And the real-time detection is something like a sensing that we've been looking at the POC. It's literally milliseconds, the response you get. You're not slowing down the entire customer interaction, right? They can go on your website, they fill something out. We can load data, we batch things overnight, we load it through. And I remember the first time we were running through the POC, we loaded, I can't tell you how many millions of records went through, and it was done within like a minute or two. The person on the back end was double checking because they thought maybe something failed, something happened. No, it's quick. And you need that speed. You need to be able to generate the responses in order to tackle it effectively. So how do we maximize the value of entity resolution? Well, there's a whole data layer integration, right? And when you look at it, and this kind of goes into the fraud detection part as well, where one fraud case will probably cover the cost of a license, let's say, per se, right? And that was part of the whole cost versus build. How much time, resources do you need to put together an entire team to build this out versus just getting a license and the speed of being able to deploy this immediately, don't have to take care of the upkeep, the maintenance aspect, and be able to prevent the fraud from occurring in the first place. So enhancing that data layer, being able to have that accurate information on your clients, on producers that are working, representing your firm, or either through third parties, understanding all those relationships are absolutely key. From a risk management perspective, I was mentioning before the abandoned property. It's a huge issue everywhere. I mean, just think about yourselves. How many of you have a life insurance product? You have something, few, raising. How many of you have like a bank account or an investment account? I think pretty much almost everybody, right? What was the last time you updated your beneficiaries when you think about that? It's probably been a while, right? Probably more than 5 years, 10 years. In some cases, you get a life insurance policy when you're buying a house or you have a child. You set it up at that time, you never look back, right? And that's where the information starts to get out of date. We were able to go through the POC and link it to, hey, that beneficiary is actually a client. Here's the updated address. Here's the updated email address that we have on file. It tremendously helped the claim process. But more from that, it's also a compliance requirement. Believe it or not, we get audited by different states to make sure that we're doing everything possible to find that beneficiary. And because this, eventually that money, if it sits there abandoned and we can't find somebody, it gets sheeted to the state, and then it's a whole other cumbersome process for the beneficiary to get that money back. And when you think about it, we want to put that money in that client's hands. That can lead to potential cross-sell, a future relationship, and whatnot. So overall, there's client trust in there, cost efficiency, and that's that leads to positive outcomes. And I'm coming up here on time, but that's basically all I had here today. And if anybody wants to reach out to us, I'll be hanging out over there on K49 over there at the booth with Sensing for a little bit. If anybody has any questions or anything, we could take it off stage. Thank you.